All right, we're back, and this is Aaron Brush, Zach Elder, and this is the MacStrength Performance Podcast. I forgot to tell you I gave it a name.
MacStrength Performance
Podcast.
I like it.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
First time hearing that.
we're a well-oiled machine.
Yes.
So today we had talked about wanting to discuss plate approach.
Yep.
So one of the things that we see a lot with these high school aged hitters when we sort of let them out into the wild during their high school spring seasons is managing their approach both to their individual at bats, which is when most people hear plate approach, they think like, I'm going up to the plate for an at bat. How do I approach this at bat? That's plate approach, right? Which is true, correct. But also, plate approach is a more broad thing. Like, how do I approach my games? How do I approach my season? How do I interpret whether or not I had a good game or a bad game? How do I know what I need to improve on? How do I give myself honest feedback about my games? That's all encompassed under the category of plate approach. And so we see this a lot, and we've seen it this year as much as anything. And we've discussed it a little bit. Like, how do we help these guys overcome this? And I call it putting qualifiers on your performance. So we'll get a high school kid who is off playing his varsity games, and he comes in here for training session, and we're like, how'd your game go? And he says, well, it was good, but eh. And we're like, okay, so what happened? He's like, well, I hit 2 doubles and a homer, but the pitcher sucked. And we're like, oh my God, pal, like, what do you mean? Like,
yeah,
happens
a lot.
And it happens a lot more than you would think.
Uh-huh.
And so we're always telling these kids, don't put qualifiers in your performance. Don't say, I played well, but it's only because circumstances were just right. That's bullshit.
Mm-hmm.
You don't need to make excuses for doing well. Did everybody else on your team hit 2 doubles and a homer? No? Well, then you played well. You did your job. And then the other side of that coin that we get sometimes, often, how'd your game go? Oh, it went bad. I was 0 for 4. Oh, really? Okay, let's talk about the at-bats. Let's go over them, right? Well, first at-bat, I got a fastball, and I hit it hard, but the left fielder caught it. Second at-bat, I flew out to the track. My third at-bat, I hit a ball hard back at the pitcher, and he caught it on a line. And my fourth at-bat, I flew out again. And we're like, that didn't sound like that bad of a game, man. And we always have to remind kids that your goal isn't to get a hit. Your goal is to go up, compete, drive the baseball, be a tough out, have quality at-bats, and helping them define what a quality at-bat is and how's my approach measured against the previous at-bat, the previous game. That's a huge process.
And that approach is the second approach that you were talking about is the most frustrating with kids. Because they come in and they look at the results. And that, I mean, for kids now today, like, the results is all that matters. It's, oh, are you hitting over 300?
Mm-hmm.
Are you hitting over 350 or whatever? And those kids kind of want to brag to their friends about it. They want to show it off to the coach. Like, obviously, that stuff helps. But if you're going 0 for 4 with 4 lineouts to center field, the pitcher, wherever, like, that is a very, very good day. Because eventually, I usually say this, the baseball gods even stuff out. Like, you're going to get blue single hits from time to time. You're going to hit a home run that goes high in the air, catches in the wind stream.
You didn't deserve.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's just going to happen. So stuff like that. But that second approach is very, very frustrating to deal with because it's like, dude, like, you're doing the right things that you need to do. Like, get out of your own way, like, and just keep
Part
going.
of the puzzle for them to solve is that the sample size is always so small for high school aged hitters.
Mm-hmm.
At least here in Minnesota, the season is like 60 at bats, and that's if you're an everyday starter. I think that the leader of at bats on my high school team most years was like 70s to low 80s, and those were dudes who didn't walk ever, right? So you're getting between 75 and 85 plate appearances if you play all 20 of your games, or if you go to the section championship, you're going to get less than 100 plate
Oh
appearances.
yeah, yeah.
And so we can say all we want, like eventually things even out if you just go and you compete, but it's hard for them to reconcile with that because the sample size is always so small. They go, we had one kid who was real excited because he was hitting 500, or he was hitting above 500, and we're like looking at the calendar, and we were like, there's no way he's played more than like 4 games, right? And turns out he hadn't. He was like something like 7 for 11 or something like that, and we were like, oh man, we gotta bring him down a notch so that he doesn't come crashing down
Yep.
when the statistics even out.
Riding that roller
He can
coaster.
continue to play well and have his average go down for no other reason that there's 9 dudes standing out there. People always forget that hitting isn't one-on-one.
No.
Hitting is 1-on-9. And the game of failure rhetoric that gets pushed on kids, like, oh, 3 out of 10 success rate, you're in the Hall of Fame. Nope. 3 out of 10 success rate, you're on the bench, because success is not getting a hit. Because there's a lot out there that you cannot control. And so educating them on what they're trying to actually accomplish is big. So let's get into specifics a little bit of the plate approach.
Okay.
One of the things, let's start here. One of the things that we talk about all the time with guys is that they should always be ready to hit the fastball.
Yep.
And that's not like a new thing. That's not overly insightful. I imagine if there's any baseball coach watching this, they're like, well, yeah.
Sit fastball, react to curveball.
Sit fastball, react to curveball. But it's deeper than that, right? We often will talk about what kind of fastball, and we'll talk about fastballs middle away.
Yep.
Specifically middle away. How many high school pitchers can confidently bring their fastball inside?
Not that many. And if they are, most of those guys are top end elite pitchers in high school.
It's going to be a tough at bat anyway.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Right. And so the way that we use this to kind of educate our training is that we do not allow any, like, we have players flip to each other a lot because we feel that it's important to be able to flip well, throw to your teammates well. Let's come back to why that's important. I feel like I have something to say on that, but let's put a pin in that for a second.
Okay.
We really, really harp on making sure that you're not flipping in, because it's so easy to sort of flip in on the plate, and in flip setting, in like a front toss setting, you hit well doing that.
Oh yeah,
you can just turn and burn on the ball. You hit the ball hard, and people are like, oh, he's hitting great. And then you go out in a game and you're complaining because, oh, the umpire, he's giving it 3 balls off the plate. Your perception is wrong because you've only seen anything middle in for the last 3 months of training. So now you interpret the outer half of the plate as the next zip code.
Yep.
And that's a real problem that guys have to deal with. And so we make sure that they're middle away. What else? We talk about how we have to make sure that we set up the machines in a certain way so that they're throwing with a realistic spin.
Yes.
You can't get
people
make this mistake all the time. When people set up a machine and it's backspinning too much.
Yep.
It's backspinning way more than a human will ever backspin it.
Yep. Looks like it's coming in at 110.
Yeah,
Yep.
And it's just taken off.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes you can get those machines to actually rise.
Yeah.
Not just look like they're rising, but you can get them to actually rise. So you got to be careful about that, because you want it to be like a fastball that is actually going to get thrown to them by a high school pitcher.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's obviously very important. When we work on adjusting or reacting to breaking balls, a lot of times we do it in situations where they know it's coming, like we do the
and we also just slow everything down, so it's able to actually see the spin, see the ball, in essence sitting on your backside as well, and not getting two under the ball or two over the ball, but seeing that spin.
Yeah. One of the way that I've always looked at that is, we talk about you want to be able to read and react, and you want to introduce some level of chaos into your training,
Yes.
right? However, I have always felt like hitting breaking balls in a situation where it's coming helps educate you on how to hit a breaking ball well. And I
Oh
think
yeah.
that I've always felt like that's useful because there is sort of a way, there's a technique to hitting a breaking ball really well because it's not coming in at the exact same angle.
Mm-mm.
You have to feel the same start to your swing
Yep.
because you have to be on time, and then you have to feel the weight in your feet differently. And so learning how, like, okay, this is how a curveball is hit. This is how I drive a curveball to the outfield before we ever introduce the chaos. And we usually introduce the chaos via our live at bats. We do live at bats
Yes.
really early on in the year, earlier than most.
Which is really good.
And so that's kind of our vehicle for the chaos, where it's like, okay, now I don't know what he's going to throw next, but it's also the advantage that you're facing a person, you're facing a human being.
Have to throw them to the fire a little bit.
Yeah, yeah, and they'll fail. They fail a lot. The first, usually when we start live at bats in January, it's pitchers have the advantage to start with, and then it swings towards hitters a little bit,
It always does.
and then it swings back towards pitchers and then back towards hitters a little bit. There's kind of an ebb and a flow here in the facility usually of hitters have the advantage, pitchers have the advantage, hitters have the advantage, pitchers have the advantage, because they're learning, adjusting, educating. They have good days, they have bad days, right? And so that is one of those things where the game of failure thing, like actually failing in training so that you can go out and have success in games, is like, that's a duh.
Yeah.
But then bringing it back, understanding what success actually is so important.
And that's what has been so cool. I mean, for it being my first year seeing how the winter went with guys, I mean, there were stretches where I bet there are some guys out there that didn't come in because they're like, I screwed up, or not screwed up, but had really, really bad days training, hitting. And then, I mean, now, most of the guys are doing really, really well.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's a small few that, they haven't been doing as well, but I mean, they're still grinding stuff out. They're still coming in, getting their work in. But that gratification of seeing those guys work throughout the winter and then being thrown into that fire, and most of them understand that at the beginning of the season, not everything is going to work out. I mean, Mac, about a week or so before the high school season start, Mac didn't sit him down, but a big group talk about, hey, your swing could be really, really good right now and at your peak, but there's going to be a huge adjustment period when you go back, because I mean, we're throwing equivalent to 98-mile-an-hour fastballs in there off the machine. Like, there's just going to be different things that you're going to have to adjust to, whether that's the culture around the team, position wise, a couple of other things just with the playing atmosphere and like kind of your playing situation.
Mm-hmm.
But I thought that throughout the winter and seeing those guys kind of go through that stuff was cool, but it was also how they adjusted to that, and then making those kind of like, yes, I did this, I was able to do this and overcome that, was
Mm-hmm.
cool. But
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned culture, because I think that the little qualifiers that you put on your own performance, I think that comes from a negative culture that they have been around at some point in their life. It might not
100%.
be the team that they're on today, but at some point they've been around somebody that has said things like that about somebody else, and they've internalized that. So, they know somebody who's playing really well, and somebody else has like the sour grapes thing. Yeah, well, he's facing bad pitching, or he only threw a hitter because that team's, or a no hitter. Excuse me, he only threw a no hitter because that team sucks. Nobody can hit on that team, so it was easy to throw a no hitter.
Yeah.
Like, dude, that is so negative. But when you're a kid, you don't really pick up on the negativity of that. You just sort of internalize it. You kind of go, oh, yeah, I guess that's a good point. They are kind of bad. Or, yeah, I guess he was throwing pretty soft. I guess I was supposed to hit 3 doubles and a homer. If I don't, then it's bad. That's what my expectation was. And that culture, that psychology, it's permeates so many people in sports. I played for a college coach that had that attitude. Like we would win a game and he would be angry because we didn't win by enough. Because he saw the team
Yeah.
that we were playing against as an inferior opponent. He said,
never,
they suck. Yeah. We should have killed them, or we would lose a game to what was a good team, honestly. And he would be like, they suck. We should be, and it's like, I would always react like, hey pal, if they suck, what do we like? Do we suck then? Because we just lost and we didn't. They played better than us.
Yeah.
And they have more than one player that are better than the best players on our team. I'm not sure what to make of this, right? And that's the result, though, of like 40 years of that psychology, where you're basically equating sports to it's just measuring up skill levels, and the better guy wins, or there's like a certain amount that you're better than that opponent, so that's the amount that you should win by each time. But it's just not how it works.
Yeah, and a lot of, because even in my days, a lot of that type of stuff would go on when, like, I went to Minnetonka High School. So I was like, oh, I went 3 for 4 today, like 2 doubles and a single against, like, Buffalo. Like, sorry, Buffalo, don't mean to rip on you guys, but, like, you guys, when I was in high school,
they're good now.
I know they are, but like
they weren't when you were younger.
When I was in high school, but go talk to someone at EP, Dinah, or just somewhere like Woodbury, whatever. I would be like, oh yeah, I went 3 for 4, 2 doubles, and they'd kind of like look at me like,
so what?
Yeah, exactly.
Who'd you play?
It was just be like, oh, Buffalo. They're like, oh, dude, those guys are crap, blah blah blah. And it's just like,
sorry.
what do you want me to do? Like, I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. So,
by the way, you said that. That makes me feel like I should mention that this was not Concordia St. Paul, the college code. Lunch McKenzie was. In fact, I had cultural whiplash when I transferred colleges because we went. Yeah. I went from that environment and I went to Concordia St. Paul, where Lunch had built an environment that was so different than that. Like, it was about the process, and it was about having quality at bats, and it was about, you go out and you compete and the results will come. And I remember a moment where we did lose to a team that was probably an inferior opponent at that time, and we probably should have won. We made some mistakes. And I remember sort of bracing for the tongue lashing that we were going to get after the game. And we were playing in that league. We played the Saturday, Sunday, or no,
single on Saturday,
single
like
on,
double on. I don't know.
Whatever it was.
Yeah.
We were going to play the next day. Point is, we were going to play the next day, right? And he walks over, and all he says is like, well, let's play better tomorrow. And then he walked away. And I was like, what the hell just happened? Is that it? And I'm kind of looking around, and dudes are just sort of like gathering their stuff up and taking off their cleats. And I was like, oh my God, is this what good psychology is? And it was so refreshing because
Mitch has been around the block too, so he knows that stuff.
Yeah, but the other person in question had also been around baseball for a very long time, and that's what I mean. Like, you get stuck. It's so easy to get stuck in that psychology, and I'm really hard on the kids when they do that. I'm really firm with them because
we've already had 4 talks with.
I feel so strongly that it's so negative, and I really feel like you have to nip it in the butt early, or you're screwed, and it's just you're stuck in that mindset for so long.
Yeah, because when there's 4 specific examples that I know you and I have had conversations with a couple others. Beginning of the season, like you're playing kind of not a warm-up game, but lesser teams, and
It's usually like a non-league. It's like a
yeah,
non-conference or something like that.
and just they're like, oh, how'd you do? And oh, four doubles or something like that, and you and I just get on these guys for just trying to be like, what were you supposed to do? Like, you're doing your job.
We're like, wow, great job. And they're like, well, not really. Like, come on. All right, we've circled around this a little bit too. Let's talk about approach a little bit again. So if we get a guy coming in here, let's talk about what we tell guys who are coming in who really are struggling. Right? They're not doing the thing where they're like, oh, I played bad, but they really played well. Let's talk about what do we tell the guys that are coming in and they're like, dude, I struck out. I don't normally strike out. I'm feel like I'm late. I can't quite figure this out. Like, let's talk about for a minute.
So
What do we tell them? What do we work on? How do we analyze? Like, if they have video of their at bats, what are we looking for?
yeah, so there's rhythm and timing and all that. That's more so of just kind of getting a guy on a machine, and seeing, okay, where's your point of contact? That's the biggest one that Mac and I have been looking at with kids, breaking down. Is it because the optimal point of contact is just inside your front foot, and is the kid swinging like in the middle of his body, or is it way out in front of the plate? So that's the first thing that we look at with a kid, just to see how's he doing with that. Because either the ball's going to be at the end of the bat, or you're going to be squaring it up. It's kind of no in between.
Mm-hmm.
And then the second thing is just mechanical issues of hands cutting across. Is he getting too steep, too under the ball? Is his head moving forward? Is he out in front? Like all these other just different types of stuff.
And by the way, connecting those, the only reason that mechanics even matter at all for a hitter is because of what you started with. Because of you're trying to give yourself the optimal point of contact, but you're also trying to give yourself a wider margin for error.
Yep,
you mentioned
exactly.
hands cutting across. The reason hands cutting across and getting out of the hitting zone early is a problem is because you have to be too perfect to hit well. Because we train for rhythm and timing constantly. It's one of the most important things. But the fact is, sometimes your timing is going to be a little bit off. Sometimes you're a tiny bit early. Sometimes you're a tiny bit late. Sometimes you're going to get an off-speed pitch that you didn't see until the last second. You have to try to be able to keep your hands back and keep your hands in the zone.
Yeah.
And so the whole point of working on the mechanics that you're talking about is so that you can go out and have a little bit of a margin for error and perform well. My timing was 70% perfect instead of 95% perfect, and I still was able to go out and hit.
Yeah, and the other day we were watching the Baltimore Angels game. Shohei Otani, 4 for 5, triple, home runner, whatever, and we were in there with Chicheris, and Otani hit a triple off the wall that he didn't even use his legs. He kind of flicked the bat out.
Mm-hmm.
But when you slowed it down, everything was, hands were back. He was able to get to it. And we were talking about that with Chicheris because Chicheris does that very, very, very well.
Mm-hmm.
And just kind of seeing, I mean, we haven't touched him at all with mechanics because he's doing really well. But just to see kind of like, hey, he's able to understand that really well. And so that's been cool to see that point of contact with hitters just being able. I mean, Otani's a freak, but
his level of dexterity that he has is, I think, more he's huge. He's really big and he's extremely powerful.
mm-hmm.
But I think his dexterity is more responsible for his excellence at the plate than his size is. He
100%.
does what you just described better than almost anybody else in the entire league. He is so good at making adjustments and staying in his swing. He will do things that when you watch them in slow motion, you're flabbergasted. You're like, there's no way he can practice that. And you're right, he can't. But he is putting himself in a position to have that margin for error so that he can make those instinctive adjustments.
And that's very important, is how long can your bat stay through the zone for that margin of error if you're out in front, if you're two back.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Hang on. We're going to pause for just a second. I'm going to go tell them to quit hitting. We're going to have a little cut point, but we're back.
Yep.
We had an issue.
We had an incident. Joking, but
okay. So, let's see. Where were we? We were talking about how dexterity and margin for error is a big difference maker for the hitters, and we really try to educate them on the idea that they're looking to create a point of contact and they're not looking to create a swing.
yes.
And that's really like a big crux of what our plate approach is all about. Don't go up there trying to make a good swing. Go up there trying to make good contact. And not just make contact, make good contact.
Yes, and more so with some of the lessons I've been having with kids, that's one of the first things that I'll tell them when they're about to leave, because they'll always be like, well, what is there anything that I can take away from today? And it's, you just need to go up and swing and make hard contact. I don't care if it's on the ground, in the air.
Hard contact. It's worse to make weak contact early in an at-bat than it is to swing and miss. You have to be looking to make good, hard contact. And if you make weak contact and get a hit, you need to know that you kind of failed in that at-bat and got lucky.
Yes.
And that's okay. That's fine. It's like luck is a huge piece of this. We were just talking about how there's stuff you can't control. So you can get bad lucky and good lucky. You're gonna have both.
Yeah.
Right? You have to have both. Otherwise, you're going to drive yourself insane.
It's baseball.
Yeah. But you have to, like, when you're looking back at your game and you're doing like an honest assessment, that's how you have to look at it. You can't be like, oh, I had a great game. I was 3 for 3. But you happened to make 3 weak contact that landed in no man's land behind the first baseman because you got beat. Mm-hmm. You fisted a ball up and over his head. Like, that's not good contact. You're looking to make good contact. Yep. If you hit a ball super hard right at the shortstop.
Yeah, and I think that's another thing of kids need to stop being so hard on themselves when it comes to that. And that a little bit has to do with the culture stuff. Like, you're looking on Twitter, you're seeing all these other guys doing well. Even your parents, like, stuff like that, and just your friends as well. But I think guys need to stop putting that pressure. Like, baseball is one of those weird sports that you could, like you said earlier, you could go 3 for 3, but 3 really weak hits, or 4 for 4 with 4 lineouts. Like, you just need to. My freshman year at Towson, I was very, very like I had the yips, so I was super anxious and like in my head, and I was super, super hard on myself. And I actually met with a psychologist for the Seattle Mariners, and he was talking about tunneling, and it's just about being able to focus on your objective. And I think that was super important because I still had the yips, but I was able to quiet my mind down and not be so hard on myself when I needed to be at my best. And I think that is important for kids to not try to distract themselves with the outside noise with that. I know, like, we've talked about the swing and all that, but culturally, like, having the ability to quiet your mind and stay in the moment is super key with kind of that psychology that comes with the baseball side.
No question. Yeah, the tunneling. I don't know if I've heard it said in that exact way before, but it's focusing on your objective is such a good way to say it. You're not focusing on how people are going to react to your performance. You're not focusing on how you're feeling about it. You're not focusing on. You're putting yourself very present. Because I've always felt like that was the issue for me was you mentioned negative self-talk. Oh, my self-talk was horrible.
Same
I would
here.
never talk to anybody the way that I talk to myself.
Same here.
And I've gotten better. I have, but I also don't do that much competitive stuff. Every now and then, if I play golf, it sneaks in.
Yeah,
you know?
golf and baseball in that regards are kind
Yeah.
of, I shouldn't say the same, but a little bit there.
Yeah, it's very easy to like really beat yourself up. But I always felt like especially focusing so much on the outcome and like the statistics, it's really you're putting your mind in the future, or you're putting your mind in the past, and you're not enjoying doing the thing for the sake of doing the thing. It becomes this sort of like transaction.
Yes.
And we talked.
That's really good. I like that.
We talked recently with a couple of dudes about not making baseball transactional in the context of like recruiting. Like,
Okay.
Because they were
Yeah.
so worried about like, oh, I got to do X, Y, and Z so that I can get to the next thing. Like, are you having fun right now? Are you enjoying yourself? And they kind of looked at me like, yeah, of course, right? But I was like, really? You thought about it? Because they're not really. Because it's a transaction. I do X, I get Y, right? I do this, I get that. And so they're trying to do this so they can get the stats, so they can have the status or whatever, and they're not enjoying. And by a result of that, a proxy of that is that they don't play as well. They don't perform as well because they're not doing the thing for the sake of doing the thing, so they can never enter into anything that resembles a flow state psychologically.
Yes.
Because they're not present enough.
When they're riding that roller coaster of getting that high and then come crashing down.
And that's the thing is I think a lot of sport coaches and baseball coaches and just anybody who coaches athletes, they all want to talk about flow state. They want to say, oh, flow state is this goal that we're trying to achieve. You're trying to get into a flow state so you perform well. But what they don't understand, or maybe they do understand it, but they kind of forget it, is that flow, by its definition, is not just about performance, but it's also about the quality of the experience.
Ooh.
And if you're not doing the thing for the sake of the thing itself, you've got no chance.
Yeah, I've never heard it that way, but that makes a lot of sense in the regards of, I guess how I interpret it is staying in the moment, being able to be self-aware and actually, well, it's not thinking ahead or thinking in the past like you said earlier. It's having the ability to kind of do what you need to do in that present time. But I like the way you put it there because I had never thought of it that way.
Yeah, but I wish I had learned that and adopted that perspective a lot earlier. I didn't learn it until I started coaching.
100%. Yeah.
I didn't, and being removed from it was what gave me, I think, the ability to finally look at it in like an honest and objective way. Because I had my sense of self wrapped up in it far too much to really honestly understand it.
Yeah.
It was so fragile, And,
yeah.
So, and when it comes to helping others, it's so challenging because you want them to see it the way you see it, but you know that they can't
They
or
have to go
won't
through that experience
until they go through that experience. And so really what you're doing is you're just sort of like, I often kind of think of it like this analogy where, when you were a little kid and you were about to do something dangerous and your parents sort of weighed, like, how bad can he get hurt if I just let him do this thing and learn it the hard way?
Yep.
And if they decided it wasn't that bad, they would just let you do it. That's kind of the way I feel about it. It's like, how bad can this be if I just sort of let him shoot himself in the foot? And I'll weigh it, and then I'll decide whether or not I'm going to let him shoot himself in the foot. And it just depends on just how negative that psychology is. It's 'cause sometimes it's negative enough where it's like,
can really scar him.
Yeah, I mean, he's not playing with he's not playing with an airsoft gun. He's playing with a real gun. I don't know. It's more dangerous. Like he's going to really hurt himself in a permanent way when it comes to his baseball career, and it's going to start to associate it negatively. That's when I feel like I really have to step in. Before I forget, I said I wanted to circle back to why we feel like it's really important that they know how to flip.
Yes.
I have an explanation to that.
Okay.
And this is how I explain it to the kids. I think you've heard me say this before, but I always tell them, I like to lead with it because they don't know what I mean. I'll go, if you don't know how to flip, you won't have any friends in college.
It's true.
And they go, what? And I'm like, dude, think about it. If you go hit extra on your own in college, which you will, or you'll try to, or you should, who's going to flip to you? Us? Like, we're going to flip to each other? That's right. What happens if you suck at flipping?
I don't want to be your friend.
You don't get invited, right? You don't get invited to hit extra. They don't text you to meet you at the cage because you suck at flipping and nobody wants to hit with you because you can't carry your own weight.
Yep.
When do you think social plans are made? And they're like, what? I'm like, they're made in the cage, dude.
Yes.
Hey, where are we hanging out? What bar are we going to? Are we, hey, this group of girls wants to hang out with us. Do you want to come? That all happens while you're hitting together. And if you don't get invited because you can't flip, you don't have any friends.
You're missing out.
And your college experience is sad. So that's it. That's how I explain it. But then in a more real sense, in a more real like development sense, if you can't flip well, then you don't have a good understanding of how it needs to be done. Then you also don't know how your own training as a hitter needs to go. Because you need to be able to, if somebody is flipping badly to you, you need to be able to recognize it and tell them how to flip better. And if you can't flip, then you're going to have a hard time doing that.
Yeah.
So,
and more so or not, there's a ton of bad flippers out there. So
brutal.
Don't feel too bad, but
feel bad. Feel bad.
Don't take it too personal though, but be better. Because I mean, that's one thing. Like flipping to Mac is very stressful because he likes it his way, and totally get that. Like, played pro ball, like he has it his way.
But that's just it. The higher levels you go, the more particular everybody is, and the more important it is that you know what you're doing.
Yes.
Right. And so it's stressful flipping to somebody who's played at a really high level because you're like, I need to really execute. It's less stressful flipping to some like 14-year-old because he doesn't know what he's looking for yet.
No.
And if you're having an off day, he's not going to call you on it.
Don't tell him that.
So, yeah. What else you got? I feel like that's a decent place to
wrap up. I just think for guys really just need to look at, they need to take a moment and step back from the situation, or not the situation, but their games, and really assess and take time to think about each at-bat. Like, really take the time. Could be 5 minutes, could be an hour. Well, no, don't do an hour. That's obsessing over it way too much. But taking some time and saying, did I get my pitch? What was kind of the result of it? Like, was it a line out? Did I pop one up to the first baseman? And kind of think about that at bat and visualize it a little bit. Like, how did you feel it? What did you feel? And just taking the time to assess and not being too hard on yourself and going from there. Because I think for high schoolers, like if you're able to do that, you're going to go so far in your college experience. You will be ahead by the freshmen that are coming in by leaps and bounds. So I would say just taking the time to look at your at-bats, not being too hard on yourself, and going from there. Whether that be mechanical stuff or being more aggressive. So, and knowing yourself with that type of stuff. But that's the last thing I have for these guys. I think that is very, very important to visualize and to look over that stuff.
Okay, good. Good place to end.
Yeah.